I'd like to welcome you all to our event today. My name is Larry Pearson. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Impetus Technologies, and I'll be your host and MC for today's webinar entitled The Fastest Way to Convert ETL, Analytics, and Data Warehouse to AWS. For those who may not be familiar with Impetus Technologies, we are a U.S. company. We're headquartered in the heart of Silicon Valley, and we distinguish ourselves from other providers in this space in at least a couple of different ways. The first is that we specialize, and we specialize in what I like to call all things data, which is commonly referred to as the goal of having a single source of truth on which to base data-driven enterprise decision-making. And you see our mission statement here at the top. It's actually inspired from exactly that, helping large enterprises create a unified, clear, and present view of their business. Secondly, we have a wide range of services and also software products that address the full life cycle from technology strategy and cloud migration through big data processing, advanced analytics, BI, and even DevOps. You see some of those services and solutions depicted on this slide here. And of course, today, we'll be focusing on some powerful full lifecycle automation tooling, which is another way that we differentiate ourselves from people who are just consultants or pure service providers. That will be showing that tool and how it can accelerate your move to AWS. And so regardless of where you are in your big data, in your enterprise analytics journey, we have the ability within that set of offerings to help you take the next step. You'll see in a minute a poll pop up also on your screen, and again, it's just another way that we add an interactive component to your user experience today. And the poll question says, "What architecture do you plan to use on AWS?" And you can indicate whether you're using a native stack, custom stack, or have not even determined yet quite what that is, or in an evaluation mode. We have a lot of experience with the whole matter of cloud migration strategy. And if that is the case, we can help you in that area as well. Let's look briefly now at the agenda. We will start out by talking about cloud migration strategy, some of the motivations that, some of the things that enterprises are looking for by moving to AWS, how we can help you achieve that, and specifically then talk about our automated workload transformation to AWS, which has automation for every step in the journey from wherever you may be today to a modern data architecture based on AWS. That will be followed by a live demonstration of that, after which we will come back and answer your questions. So again, respond to the poll there. We'll come back and give you the results of that here shortly, and that's the agenda that will follow. Let me introduce our speakers today. Barry Tuthill has 20 years of experience in the data technology space and has been leading our field teams in the last 4 years in their work with clients. Barry is a recognized subject matter expert, a frequent speaker on the topic of the business case for digital enterprise transformation and the velocity that can be achieved by strategically applying automation to the various stages of that migration, which of course is our topic today for those of you who are looking to migrate to AWS. Also with him is Hari Kotakala. Hari is Director of Cloud and Data Strategy. He also brings 20 years of experience in data warehouse and analytics technology space. And Hari leads a team that works directly with our Fortune 500 clients to define and execute comprehensive blueprints and roadmaps and help to guide them in their cloud migration and advanced analytics journey. So we've got a lot of good content for you today. And to kick this off, Barry, I'd ask you to jump in and get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Appreciate the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. So I'm going to start off with just talking about cloud migration strategy and not really get into the business benefits of cloud. I think we all understand that these days. We've heard the value proposition around moving to the cloud, but more around kind of some of the things that we hear from customers and the objectives that we hear from them on a day-to-day basis when they're thinking about moving data platforms to the cloud. First and foremost, the ability to spin up new analytics and use cases in ways that they never thought were possible before. I mean, they've kind of had the nightmares of the traditional on-premise IT-centric processes for, delivering different types of analytics, which was very slow and costly in the past. Next, we see, especially with AWS, making massive investments in their tech stack for the value of their customers. It's enabling customers to have extreme flexibility in the different solution options that they have available, whether moving forward with native services offered by AWS or more open source options. And then, of course, you have other third-party technology that enables even more flexibility around interoperability, which we'll talk about during the session. We also see customers demanding a seamless transition to the cloud, right? There should be no disruption into, as far as the business as usual. Even customers that want to transform and re-architect everything from scratch, there's still going to be that, some level of business user expectation that certain applications and reports operate as they always have. And finally, we're hearing from customers that they want to create a more flexible, future-proof architecture that's optimized from both a cost perspective, but also a performance perspective. So when talking to customers about migration, the first question that often comes up is, do I lift and shift, or do I re-architect? And both scenarios have advantages and disadvantages. Oftentimes, customers that hear lift and shift, they almost think that it's a bad word. And these customers really tend to focus on mistakes that they've made in the past, and that's for very good reasons. You don't want to move over things that were poorly architected or complex things of the past over to a new platform. And we've seen this over and over again with customers where we've assessed their legacy platforms and just seen them riddled with redundancy and complexity. And again, that's not desirable in a new, best of breed cloud environment. On the other hand, re-architecting everything from scratch, when you're talking about potentially 10 to 15 years of business logic, that's a really scary proposition for most customers. I remember talking to a customer a few years ago where they were looking to migrate off of Ab Initio, and their project cost and projection was it was going to take them 5 years and close to $40 million to move. I think it was like 20,000 Ab Initio graphs, so that's a significant scope. But thinking of that type of project timeline and cost, that's certainly a tough pill to swallow. So here's a simple checklist that we've created for customers moving to AWS or really any cloud provider. First and foremost, reuse. So embrace what you already have. Some of the legacy stuff for sure should be thrown away. You don't want to bring it over, but there's a good portion that can be transformed as well and can be leveraged. So that's checklist number one. Second is automate. So leverage automation as much as you can for faster time to market. Throwing bodies at the problem isn't necessarily the answer, and you want to automate as much as you can. Next, optimize. So meet the performance SLAs, meet the budgets that you need on the cloud. Optimization does not have to mean you re-architect everything. You can optimize some of your legacy workloads as well in a way that is high performant and scalable on the cloud. And finally, certify. So you want to thoroughly validate before you put any applications into production. This will simplify the UAT process and ensure that your project is successful. So, maybe somewhat of an obvious checklist, but each one of these pieces we can get into more granular detail here, and we plan to during this demo session. Now I'm going to pass it back to Larry for the results of the poll. Larry?
Yes, Ops team, if you'd go ahead and close the poll so we can display that here on the screen. There we go. So you see that you recall the question was, which architecture are you planning to migrate to on AWS? Is it the native stack, a custom stack, or still attempting to decide? And you see there's a pretty even spread across all three of those. And hopefully some of what you hear today will help you regardless of which of those three you may be attempting to do. The automation platform, which you'll see today, can assist whether you're going to an AWS native stack or a custom stack. We have the ability to help you in either regard. And in the case of those of you who are undecided, it looks like maybe it's almost a one-third, one-third, one-third. There, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have the consulting expertise to help you determine what the best pathway may be. So thank you again for responding to the poll. And Barry, back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Larry. All right. So how can Impetus help? Let's first talk about the different type of architectures that we're seeing on AWS. And it's primarily three kind of core options or architectures that we're seeing. First and foremost, you have a mix of S3, EMR, and Redshift. And a lot of those times where we see customers using that architecture, you have kind of a ETL heavy type of a workload environment. So the ingestion is happening on S3, processing on EMR, and then you only move the consumption workloads over to Redshift. The next architecture that we're seeing with customers is kind of a Redshift only type of an architecture where everything is moving over to Redshift from an ingestion, processing, and consumption perspective. And then we see customers looking at bringing in, across both of those options, a mix of other types of AWS native services like Spectrum and Athena based on certain types of use cases. Now, the other option, which is very common out there in the marketplace, is using AWS, but looking at other third-party services available on AWS. And this is where, we think of, or customers are thinking more around interoperability and not tied to a specific cloud vendor. And in those cases, we see a lot of customers looking at solutions like Snowflake or Databricks. So those are kind of the core architectural scenarios that we see within most customers these days. Now let's talk about migrating to any of those types of patterns for customers. Now Impetus provides a solution for end-to-end automated migration. And it's a simple 4-step process driven through technology. And it's a process and solution that we've been using for many, many years across very large enterprise transformation projects. First and foremost, we start with the assessment. This is where we understand the legacy environment, both from a data warehousing perspective, but also all the ETL. And I'll dig into that step in a little bit more detail later. From there, we move on to the transform step, where we take the business logic that we can use from the legacy environment and transform it for AWS to be leveraged on AWS. Next, we validate, and we validate not only that the data is moved over the way we expect it, but also that the queries are executing the way we expect it. And finally, we package everything up, all the code that we're transforming, we package it up for execution. And all of these steps are accelerated through automation and supported by our team of cloud experts. So let's dig into each one of these steps in a little bit more detail. The assessment is the first step. And what we're doing here is doing an analysis of the legacy data warehouse. And we're looking at some of the following things. We're analyzing the environment for redundancy. We're looking at complexity. We're also looking at the interdependencies across the different capabilities that are being leveraged, so schedulers, ETL tools, and queries. We're also looking at optimization strategies in all areas as well. So areas where we can do parallel execution, where we can do things like partitioning, bucketing, and clustering. Obviously, these are all for, ensuring that what we're moving over to the target environment is running the way we would expect it. Next, we're looking at the capacity needs for the target architecture, so we can ensure that we're going to achieve the SLAs needed for the customer. And finally, we're creating a blueprint for our customer's transformation. This includes documentation as well as a phase-wise, project execution plan. The next step is transformation. In the transformation step, we're using the Impetus workload transformation solution to do a number of things. First, we're getting as much as 80% automated code conversion to an optimized schema on AWS. We're automatically handling things like data types, views, intervals, loops, procedures, and others. We're also automatically applying patterns to the target platform in areas like ingestion, data sync, reconciliation, lineage, security. Again, all of these things are handled in an automated way. We're also identifying new patterns. This is the uniqueness within the customer environment that represents opportunity areas to enhance the Impetus process and the Impetus tooling to help achieve more automation for our customers. And then the final two steps are validation and execution. The automated validation process ensures that our customers are going to get the data and the results that they expect. So this really simplifies the whole UAT process, helps reduce project risk, and then also helps accelerate the decommissioning of the legacy platform. Here, let's look at the business value of automation, right, across multiple different dimensions, right? First, we're looking at it from a manual perspective of how much time, effort it takes to go through these various steps in more of a manual, throwing bodies at the problem sort of way, versus using an automated process like an Impetus workload transformation solution. So at each step of the way, we're reducing the effort. And as you kind of go through each and every process step, you can see as we're reducing effort in each step, we're achieving a total reduction in overall effort by about 50%. So now let's just jump over to a demo so we can kind of share what we're talking about in more of a live, interactive way. Bear with me as I share my screen. So I hope that you're seeing my screen right now. This is the Impetus workload transformation home screen. As you can see, all you need is a browser to access this tool. As I had mentioned before, the first step is the assessment step, and I'm going to walk you to that in just a second. But as I logged in as a user of this tool, essentially it brings me to a dashboard, and this just gives me a view into the different types of assessments that I have running, the different transformation pipelines that I've executed, and just the kind of the state of the different projects that I have running in this tool. First, I'm going to start off with the assessment. As I dig into the reports here, I've pre-created this assessment demo. And the assessment demo has the following inputs. It has scheduler scripts that I'm analyzing from AutoSys. It's got DML and DDL scripts from Teradata. It has ETL jobs from Informatica, and offline query logs also from Teradata. Okay, and as I bring all these various data, these assets together into the workload transformation tool, it automatically creates this type of an assessment. So starting out at a high level, you see that the customer has already chosen AWS as their preferred platform, right? Based on the inputs of this analysis, the workload transformation assessment is recommending EMR for processing and Redshift for migrating the consumption workloads. As you can see over here, Spark is the recommended execution engine, and the reporting impact is low based on the analyzed workloads because there's a small amount of BI and consumption type workloads based on the analysis. You'll also see over here that the maintenance is moderate, and that's just basically looking at cost, right? Because we're doing most of the heavy lifting, and this is more of an ETL-based application that we're analyzing, we're moving the stuff to Spark and running and doing the heavy lifting on EMR, which is more cost-effective than Redshift. So as I scroll down a little bit more, let's start by looking at the scheduler scripts. And this is this job section here. This gives us the highest level view of the migration use case. So if I click on here and drill into this dashboard, it gives me more information. And what I want to do, I've got my jobs listed and the amount of queries are running in these jobs. But if I look at the graphical view here, what it creates is a graph matrix of the interdependencies across these different workloads and almost gives us a lineage of the jobs that are being executed. Okay, let me pop back out there. Next, let's look, I go back to the highlights page. Now let's go down a little bit further and let's look at the queries. We start by looking at the total amount of queries that were given to us within the query logs of Teradata. As you can see, there are 15,600 or so queries. However, only about 5,500 of those queries are unique. So this is important because what this allows us to identify is redundancy, right? We don't want to be migrating and transforming redundant queries because that'll just increase the effort and cost, right? So that's the first thing that we want to try to eliminate is migrating redundancy. Next, we look at the query types and the query constructs. Now, this is a very important area. As I drill into these query types, you can see that I've bucketed them across the different, the different types that there are. But more importantly, what's happening here is we're applying a complexity score against each and every query. And this gives us visibility, or gives our team visibility into what falls into the categories of what can be easily migrated over and optimized over to AWS in an automated way versus what might need to be re-architected and built from scratch in the AWS platform. So we look at this both from a query type perspective. We also, if I go back, we also look at it from a query constructs as well and have a complexity score applied here. Again, with the goal of identifying what can be easily automated, automatically transformed versus what might need to be re-architected. Similarly, we can look at ETL jobs from the same perspective because I mentioned that this analysis had Informatica jobs that we were looking at as well. And as you can see, we've analyzed a total of 25 Informatica files, right? And we've also bucketed them across the various complexity levels. So again, this gives us good visibility into the type of automation that we'll be able to achieve versus some of the complex things we might want to look at and do some transformation manually. Okay, so that's the ETL portion of this. What's also interesting to take a look at is we can also look at Lineage, right? So this will give us a more detailed view. We looked at a very high level Lineage, but this also gives us a query by query lineage here, right? Where we can understand the dependencies across different queries. And this helps plan our migration of, build out that migration blueprint and plan. Okay. As moving forward here, let me jump back to the highlights page. And if I scroll down, we also start looking at CPU, I/O, and execution time of the various applications running in the legacy environment. If I drill into this part of the dashboard, I can see all the applications that are running, and the percentage of execution time, CPU, and I/O time each one of these applications is taking. And this gives us a lot of visibility for customers that might want to kind of gradually migrate some of their legacy platforms over to AWS. It also shows kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of where should I prioritize my migration. It also gives us visibility into the capacity requirements that are going to be needed for these different applications in the AWS environment. So that's what we look at from an application level perspective. Next, let's take a peek at optimization. So one of the things that I mentioned about the assessment is we want to try to identify the optimization requirements or needs as we auto transform the schema and queries. So if I dig into this recommendations part of the demo and go to entities, what I can see here is, we've got a total of 408 used entities, 2 unused entities, and I can, look at this a little bit more detail. Here, for example, this table, this entity name right here, we're getting some recommendations around optimization. So where we should do partitioning, where we should do clustering, bucketing strategies. We also see dependency here as well. We've also identified technical debt here. So as you can see, there's 2 unused entities. So when we think about migration, we want to be able to do that type of hot-cold analysis. We don't want to be migrating data and tables over that aren't being leveraged. So, so that's what we're doing from an optimization perspective when we look at entities. We're also looking at optimization from an execution perspective. So if I go back to this analysis tab and go look at execution, what we're looking at here is highlights that basically show candidates for parallel execution on the target environment. Okay, so this will help us simplify the execution of jobs, figure out where we can run things in parallel, and ultimately help improve performance. So that's I know for the purposes of time, that's kind of a quick overview of the assessment capabilities within the workload transformation tool. I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the things that I showed you and ultimately, what it means from a value perspective. So, first we identified what can and should be migrated and what can be automated versus what needs to be re-architected, right? So we looked at those complexity levels. We also looked at dependencies across jobs, across files, across scripts. This helps us help plan that migration strategy with the customer and build that blueprint for transformation. Next, we look at the different workload characteristics. And by looking at those workload characteristics, we can then identify what's the right cloud service. If you already haven't made a architectural decision, we can use this this assessment to help kind of guide our customers with, hey, what is the best service to leverage based on the different applications and workloads. Next, we looked at optimization. So we looked at how that can be achieved, what can be achieved in an automated way. But then obviously there are always those outliers of, where the tool can't just auto optimize everything. We have our experts in play that can help, identify things that might need to be addressed more manually. And ultimately the output of this whole assessment process is a comprehensive assessment and a blueprint for our customers with how they should approach their transformation program. So that is the overview of assessment. Now, the nice thing about this tool is that the data and information that you get from this assessment is immediately actionable. So if I go to back to the menu and I go to this pipeline area, I can create immediately create a transformation job where I'm actually starting to migrate and transform workloads. I've got a number of pipelines created. I'm going to go into this Teradata to Redshift pipeline. And as you can see here, we've got a number of steps that we go through when we actually execute a migration project. The first step is migration. This is where we migrate the data and the tables and views. We do a validation step. We've got a translation step, an execution step. So it goes from the bottom up. Here's visually what a pipeline looks like. Right? And to create a pipeline like this, it's as simple as dragging and dropping these different operations over to this canvas. And behind the scenes, there's a number of configuration options, but for simplicity, we won't go through that. Please reach out if you want to dig into this a little bit more. But we've already executed this pipeline. So I'm just going to walk you through the output of this. So if I go to the output and go into each one of these steps, as you can see, we've got this migration step. We can see that the data, schemas, and views were migrated to the target table successfully. We've got this warehouse table. This table has been created. It didn't need data moved. So as you can see, this doesn't match because there was no data moved, but we were creating this target table. In this next table, store sales, obviously there was data moved here, and you can see that the source and target matches, right? So that's the first step, migration. The next step is a data validation step where we're running certain validation functions, for example, in this case, average, min, max, sum, against the data as we're moving it over to make sure that they've matched. And as you can see, we see that these values match. Let me move over to kind of the secret sauce, if you will, and where we really show kind of that acceleration of the code conversion process is this translation step. And what you see here is a number of queries that we've moved through our transformation engine. We've auto-transformed this, Teradata insert query to a query that is designed to run in Redshift. And we've got a number of options here. So this is where we're transforming the query. Now we also transform the whole packaging and execution of this. So if I go down to move over to this package area and go to this part of the package, what you're seeing here is actually PySpark code that was generated along with the queries. So wrapped around these queries is this PySpark code that is auto transformed and ultimately puts us in a position to move to the next step, which is execution. So we're auto converting the packaging, we're auto converting the queries, and it's being produced in a way that's ready to be executed in the Redshift environment. So that's really from a demo perspective what I wanted to share with you today. Post the translation step, we also have the execution step. Again, that's where we move that package to be executed against Redshift. And we've got a number of other validation steps here where we're validating the data on the target environment. We're validating the queries that are, that they're being executed and performing the way we would expect in that environment. But, as you can see, what we have is really an end-to-end process and methodology that's driven through technology to help accelerate the whole conversion process. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll get back to the slides here. And just a couple more slides here before we finish. We already kind of walked through this whole effort. If you think about the different steps that I walked through and how we're automating it with the tooling, I hope you can kind of appreciate how we achieve that overall, 50% reduction in effort. But I think more importantly is the risk mitigation, because when you approach this purely from a manual perspective and throwing bodies at the problem, there's a lot of risk associated with that. This is just kind of a summary slide here of what the tool is capable of. Obviously, we don't just do Teradata to Redshift. We support a variety of different architecture options for our customers. As you can see on the left-hand side, those are the various different legacy technologies that we can help transform and accelerate the migration of over to the cloud. And then on the right-hand side, you see the various different target technologies that we support. And we go through this, again, this 4-step assess, transform, validate, execute process. And finally, here is just a quick overview of the business value that our customers see leveraging our methodology and tooling. Obviously, the assessment process gives you much more informed data-driven decisions around your architecture choices and what needs to happen in your target environment. Zero disruption, so ensure that you can keep the business as usual moving forward, right? And the legacy platform is not going to be shut down until you have everything executed and validated in your target environment. We're going to mitigate these risks related to manual migration. We've seen a lot of, I think we've helped save a lot of programs for customers that have, tried to approach this problem with a, pure SI brute force driven process. And there's a lot of challenges with that because we see a lot of corners being cut in those types of scenarios. So definitely we're providing more visibility into the process to reduce risks. We're helping you reuse these existing assets and maximize those investments that you've made, the millions and millions of dollars that you've spent on these legacy platforms. In many cases, it doesn't make sense to throw away everything. We do all that by, while, I should say, accelerating your time to transformation and your time to the new platform. So that's it for me. I appreciate your time and listening to me. I'm going to pass this back off to Larry to close up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive run through of how we can automate critical portions of the migration to AWS. Very, very helpful. And I'm sure our audience also has some questions queued up, and we're going to move to those shortly. Before doing that, you'll see another poll pop up and a feedback screen. And we would ask you to take a few minutes here before we move to the Q&A portion to give us some feedback on your experience here with the webinar. There is an opportunity also to put some comments in there. We look at all of those and often get some very helpful suggestions that we've been able to use to improve the user experience of others who participate in various webinars that we offer. We also want to give you the opportunity to explore all of this in a deeper way. And so there's a question there that says, would you be interested in a deep dive of the solution as shown in the webinar today? When we do that, it gives us an opportunity to really tailor the discussion, not to a broad spectrum audience like we had today, but very specifically to maybe some questions, some issues, some aspects of the source and target relationships that are very specific to your environment. And those workshops tend to be very, very helpful. And if you want us to do that, be sure to answer that question yes, and we'll have one of our subject matter experts or solution architects follow up with you. What we'd like to do now is move to your questions. We've got some questions that have come in already, and I'll ask Heidi to get us started. The first one says, do you have an example where Impetus has been instrumental in migrating enterprise workloads to AWS? And how does the assessment phase help in taking a call on the architectural approach, the roadmap, the blueprint, and so forth? And Heidi, I know you and your team do that with our clients, on a regular basis, and I'm sure you'll have some interesting insights to offer. So Heidi, if you jump in at this point.
Thank you, Larry. That's a great question. And this comes with on the minds of every customer. They want to know what we have done, and we have certainly helped a lot of customers. The one that comes to my mind is a mid-sized bank that had their legacy EDW housed in Oracle using Informatica in their on-premise environment, and they were looking to move to the AWS and kind of leverage AWS-native architecture from the different architectures that Barry touched upon during the presentation. We have helped them migrate, and it's an ongoing journey. We've done that in a faster way and taken them to Redshift. At the same time, moved all their ETL workloads to kind of process on EMR Spark. And that's kind of one of the architectures that we have done. And it has been executed in the same fashion, going through the life cycle that Larry talked about. Through the assessment, we were able to quickly find out the complexity of their ecosystem, find out a dependency matrix, identify what would be the optimal architectural design for it to run natively in AWS, giving them the performance that they're getting, and likewise seamlessly and transparently migrate their workloads into AWS. So that would be a good example of that. And doing that assessment as the precursor step is the primary, I would say, readout that the team gets is extremely helpful in doing things preemptively versus reacting and once we migrate stuff to AWS, and reduces a lot of rework, which otherwise would be pretty much commonplace in a manual approach. So that's definitely one of the advantages you get through the assessment.
Interesting. Excellent, Hadi. I see some other questions that have come in. There's one here that says, I have some complex Oracle PLSQL. Can the tool help me migrate Oracle stored procedures over to AWS, and how would that be done? Hadi, maybe you want to take that one also.
Absolutely. I know we've talked about Teradata, which is also a mainstay of our acceleration, and we have helped customers do that. When it comes to Oracle, as I was talking about the bank earlier, Certainly the engine has the capability to understand Oracle PLSQL grammar and quickly identify based on the target environment that we are migrating into and generate the appropriate transformations and do it really well. And the degree of automation we get across everything in the Oracle, I would say in the Oracle code toolkit, like all the way from packages, cursors, dynamic SQL, whatever you have. There are patterns available in our grammar engine in the accelerator, which can take care of that transformation in a pretty high degree. We anticipate and we get around anywhere north of 80% on average as we send this code through the engine. So PLSQL is certainly not a challenge for us to handle.
Excellent. I'm seeing some other questions that have come in. For example, there's one here that says it's kind of an interesting question the way it's phrased. It says, "What do you find to be the trickiest challenge in a migration journey?" How do you, I know you've done lots of these. Is there a way for you to generalize across some of the most common challenge areas?
Hey, Larry, why don't I take it?
That'd be great.
So yeah, the trickiest scenarios that we've come by, I think a lot of times I think that the trickery really comes to play with the types of sources that we're dealing with. I think, I'll give you an example, like when we deal with ab initio, and if that's in play with as part of the legacy data warehouse, that does make things a little trickier for a variety of reasons, just the way the ab initio has set up their tool and some of the limitations that they have created in their tool. So I think, part of it is, looking at the source environment and the different technologies we look at. Some are easier than others. When I brought up to 90% automation, we can get 90% automation in those Teradata, Netezza, Vertica type of environments. When we talk about ab initio and maybe data stage, for example, those are a little bit tougher, right? And the amount of automation that we would get, is in the 70, 80%. Still significant, but requires a little bit more, heavy lifting on the manual conversion side in many cases when we do the end-to-end transformation. The other tricks are, getting, I think it's oftentimes just to the nature of the companies that we work with and the size. There's a lot of limitations as far as the data that we can get access to. So when we go to that assessment phase, right? And I showed you all the different inputs that we had, in that assessment. Well, we don't always get all of that stuff, right? So when we don't get all of it, it can certainly limit some of the visibility we'll get into that assessment and makes the way we plan a migration or strategize on a migration maybe a little bit different. So I would say those are probably, kind of two core challenges that kind of we, kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis, and where things can get tricky sometimes.
Great, very, very helpful. Seems we've had some challenges here with the audio today. I apologize for that. We've answered most of the questions that came in. There are a couple here. Can we take advantage of the analytical capabilities offered by the AWS stack using the existing source schema? Another one says, what is performance like when using the new data platforms? In our case, volume is close to 1 billion records. And we'll answer some of those in email and get answers out to everyone so that we're sure to have addressed all of the questions as we committed to you earlier at the beginning of our webinar. You'll see here on the screen now, for those of you who may want to reach us directly, You can reach us at inquiry@impetus.com. You'll also want to visit our website where you'll find a wide range of thought leadership content. And if you have teammates that were intending to show up today and had schedule conflicts and were not able to, or maybe someone who was not aware of this, but now that you've seen the material, you've got people you want to share this with, we will have this webinar archived on our website, along with the various blogs, podcasts. We just launched a couple of new podcasts here this week. You'll want to get over and subscribe to that, case studies, white papers, and so forth. So I hope that you will visit us at www.impetus.com. And for those of you who would want some direct follow-up or have other questions, you can reach us at inquiry@impetus.com. So that closes our webinar for today. Thank you all for attending, and thank you again to our panelists for some content-rich material. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.